Welcome, fellow seekers. Today we're going to talk about why everything is easier, but it still feels so hard. And basically, the idea here is that we're kind of living in two different worlds. And I know I've experienced this personally in my life. If you guys have been watching the channel, maybe you don't know the story. In 2009, I used an energy healing book to heal my father overnight when he was in the hospital. The doctors had called us and told us that there was nothing they could do and that they expected him to die very shortly. But I went in there and I tried this energy healing for the first time, and there was an instant miraculous healing. And yet, for 15 years after that was in 2009, I didn't really change the way that I lived my life. I kind of lived in the old paradigm even though I had this life-changing experience. And I did integrate it in some ways. I did change my life. I went in a radically different direction, but I kind of still forgot about spirit. I forgot about energy. I forgot about this, basically what I talk about on this channel. So today we have more spiritual tools than ever, more freedom to choose our path than ever, and more ability to connect than ever. So why does everything feel hard? You know, we're learning all these spiritual abilities to manifest our desires, to be more in tune with God, with the universe. We understand that our thoughts create reality, that our emotions are guiding us, all these things that I've talked about in these videos. And yet it still feels like we're digging ourselves out of a hole. Often it feels like these tools don't have the effect in the world that we want them to have. And we feel like we're still living our old life before we even learn these things. So sometimes we might question, is it even helping? You know, is it useful? So even though we're living in the easiest time, where our minds are programmed from the hardest time. So we have the Dwapara Yuga tools, but the Kali Yuga operating systems. And if you're not familiar with the Yugas, I'm going to do a review we talked about on the last few live streams. Basically, the idea is that the Kali Yuga was the Dark Ages, and we're just coming out of it into the Dwapara Yuga, which is the Bronze Age, which is the Energy Age. This is the new age that everybody's talking about, and it's basically scientifically proven, as I discuss in those live streams. But even if you don't believe the Yuga theory, if you can see that there's this new paradigm, right? We have all this technology, this explosion of technology. We're in the information age, right? Everything is radically different, but we're still acting as though we haven't really learned anything. A lot of our structures are the same. So that is the idea here. So tonight I'm going to explain exactly why you feel this paradox and what to do about it. So here's the paradox. So we have every spiritual teaching in our pocket. We have, our cell phone basically has all of mankind's information and history and knowledge all in the palm of your hand. We have the freedom to live and work anywhere, basically doing almost anything anywhere in the world. We have global connection instantly, right? We can communicate with anyone on the planet. Basically, we have infinite resources and tools at our disposal. And that is this new age, the information age. And yet we feel more stuck than we've ever been, more isolated than ever, more confused than ever, and more anxious than ever. And maybe it's not all the time, but often that's how we feel. Here's the Yuga cycle review, okay? So you can see the theory basically says that the bottom of the Dark Ages was 500 AD, and we talked about how there was simultaneous collapse of empires across the planet in this period of time. The Roman Empire, of course, but also, as many people may not be aware, at the same time the Indian Empire collapsed, the Persian Empire collapsed, the Chinese Empire collapsed, the Mayan Empire collapsed, and I think another American Indian empire collapsed in that time period. Teotihuacan is a separate, it's like related to the Aztecs, but not quite. So anyways, there's all these collapses at the bottom of the Dark Ages, and the historical record shows that things like the pyramids and like Stonehenge, they were constructed back in a golden age. And we talked about this. I don't want to get too much into it again, but just to remind us. So basically, we are now ascending. That's what this shows. We were at the bottom, and now we're ascending. And now we've entered Dwapara, which is the energy age, a time period where mankind is familiar with energy. So Kali Yuga was the material age. It was about survival. It was about the use of force to get things done. And basically ignorance ruled the world. And so people had a slave mentality. They did basically what their masters or their kings told them to do. You know, a great portion of the world were peasants and slaves and serfs. That was basically what most people were. And everyone was living in a scarcity mentality. And so that's where you have to understand where we've come from. That age ended in 1700, which was basically the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. And now we're in the Dwapara Yuga, which is the energy age, where we're seeing technology and connection and awakening. And this is marked by individualism and abundance. So we're getting past the worries about survival, and now we're enjoying abundance. And basically, Dwapara Yuga is a period where mankind is abundant and no longer has to worry about their survival needs. And so they explore all these methods of individuality, right? If you have infinite abundance, now you have a choice. How am I going to live my life? And that's basically what we see today. And what we're moving into in the future is Treta Yuga, the mental age, where we are so far beyond abundance, it doesn't even matter that we're abundant anymore. And so then we focus on improving ourselves and serving each other. And so that's what we're headed. That's where we're going to. So if you can understand, we're going from survival into abundance into service. And that's why the way of service is, I discovered this after I created the way of service, but basically service is the future. Getting past just serving yourself as we do in Dwapara, the individual, and reaching forward. The way that you reach forward is by applying the way of service. The key here is that we are only 325 years into this 2400 year period. And I've created this little visual that shows, because our proximity, basically the theory is that it relates to astrology and the proximity of the Earth to the center of the galaxy. And there's a 24,000 year cycle based on our orbit with another star, also covered in the previous presentation. But basically, in an orbit, it takes a long time to actually start moving forward. So I actually graphed this out, and I found that we're right here. I did the math, okay? I did the math with the sine curve and the angle and all that, because I was curious, like, what percent enlightened are we? And I found that the answer was 4%. We're 4% up from the very bottom, with 100% being the top of the golden age, okay, which will happen in whatever it is. I think it's like 10,700 years or so, whatever the math is. So the idea is that since we're only 4% of the way up, that's why things are so hard. We're not 0%, where basically everyone is just trying to survive. And 4% has gotten us very far. So that's why I said, Heidi, when you said, if we were to use the full capacity of our brains, exactly. So this argument is that only 4% of humanity, or 4% of our ability, is in play right now. And what is amazing, another amazing synchronicity that I discovered after I did this calculation, I found a research report that said the report around the world of people experiencing a spiritual enlightenment, quote unquote, was 4%, it blew my mind when I realized it was the exact number. So 4% of people report that they are experiencing a spiritual awakening. So basically that to me was another evidence that this is true. And, that 4% shows you that, how many people is that in this planet? That's like 320 million people. If you apply 4% to 8 billion people, that's what you get. So there are 320 million people experiencing a spiritual enlightenment right now. So that is why everything is moving forward and accelerating so fast. But we still have 96% of people in this old mentality. We'll call it the Kali Yuga, or the Dark Age mentality. But they're using the Dwapara technology. So I'm going to explain that in the next slide. And this stuff really explains why we have all these challenges, right? If we consider ourselves to be a part of that 4%, which I feel that way. I feel like we're at the cutting edge with this kind of thinking, trying to do things in a brand new way. I know a lot of my friends feel that way. I feel like it really explains where we're at. We're at this 4% level. And also, the more that you learn, the more you attune yourself with, say, that 4% of people who are enlightened, the more you feel a distance from the rest of the world and the way that most people think and do things. So it's almost like this difficult paradox where you're pulling yourself away from the vast majority of people. So that also makes it very hard, very difficult, especially when those people might bring you back to your previous ways of thinking about things. And we'll get into that a little bit. So again, even if you don't believe this Yuga's theory, and I think there's a ton of evidence for it, the mathematics of the 4%, you will see through these slides that we're looking at the difference between an old way of doing things and a new way of doing things. And that's what the challenge comes from, whether or not you believe it's this particular Yuga's theory or you believe it's some other theory about the ages.